what Malley then did was to say, look, this literature on errors and biases turns out to be fundamentally misleading. Yeah, there are some errors and there are some biases, but they're not nearly as strong as people thought they were. Yeah, people sometimes use the covariation calculus, sometimes they depart from the covariation calculus, but the covariation calculus itself, being based on a misunderstanding of the situation, a misrepresentation of the situation, is probably not a good starting point for theories of social judgment. What we need, Malley said, is a new framework for studying causal attributions, what he called a folk conceptual theory, which goes back to the true roots of causal attribution in the work of Heider and Lewin. Because what Heider said was, what's really important here is what he called phenomenal causality. That is, how causality is experienced by the person, not true causality as it might be analyzed by some kind of physicist. If we're doing social cognition, we want to know how things appear to the person who's engaged in behavior. And he says, for that purpose, what we need to do is to abandon the model of the naive scientist. Heider said, like Piaget, Heider said, people analyze behavior the way a scientist would, trying to attribute causality to various kinds of elements. And Heider really said, that's actually not, well, what Heider argued was, that's how we should analyze ordinary people's causal attributions as well. And Malley says, no, let's not do that. Let's abandon the model of the person as a naive scientist, and let's just start all over again by looking at how people actually reason about behavior, their own behavior and the behavior of other people. So what he did was he went to a bunch of people, not just college students, but people in the street, and asked them not to explain artificial scenarios like John laughed at the comedian, but instead to take incidents from their own lives where they did something or somebody else did something, and then write a little scenario in which they explained why that event occurred. What Malley did was to go back to phenomenal causality, get people to explain the behavior of real people in the real world, and look at what those explanations look like. And what he discovered was that when people explain behaviors, they don't do anything like partitioning variance between the person and the situation and the actor and the target and internal and external causes. Rather, what they give is a collection of what he classifies as reasons or mere causes for behavior. So let's spend a little bit of time with Malley's viewpoint here. Okay. The first distinction that people make, according to Malley, in this new framework, is a distinction between behaviors that are intentional and behaviors that are unintentional. And he argued that people explain intentional behaviors in terms of reasons, okay? That people have actions, and those actions are grounded in beliefs and desires and values, okay? So, for example, you've got this ordinary kind of scenario. Anne studied for the test all night because she wanted to do well. There is a belief there that studying will enable you to do well, and there's a desire that she wanted to do well, and that is a reason for this behavior of studying for the test all night. When people explain intentional behavior by reasons, they fundamentally make an assumption that the actor is behaving rationally. That is, that the action flows from the beliefs and desires of the individual. But those aren't the only kinds of behaviors that we explain. Sometimes we have to explain unintentional behavior, and when we explain unintentional behavior, we shift from explaining in terms of reasons to explaining in terms of causes. When you explain something in terms of causes, you're explaining not actions, not intentional actions, but just behavior, responses, okay? There's no assumption about some rational connection between the causes and the behaviors. So, for example, you might have something like, Anne was nervous about the test results because she wanted to do well. There's no rational connection between wanting to do well and being nervous. The idea here is, well, our physiology is such that when you want something really badly and it's really important, then you get nervous. It just happens. It's not a there's no reason for it. It's not grounded in people's beliefs and desires and values. It's just the way the world operates. So intentional behavior, Malley argues, are explained by reasons. Unintentional behavior is explained by causes. Now let's take the next step here, okay? So what kinds of reasons do people give? Well, first, there are these beliefs and desires. And Malley argues that these kinds of mental states are necessary precursors to intentional action. When you engage in intentional action, you have a belief, and you have a desire, and you have a belief that your action will achieve that desire. So that's what you've got. So you've got these reasons, okay? One of Malley's most interesting insights is that a lot of reasons are associated with what he calls mental state markers. That is, the explanation actually refers to the person's mental state. So if I said to you, she went to the cafe because she wanted an authentic cappuccino, that's an explanation of her behavior, of this person's behavior in terms of her desire. If I say to you, she went to the cafe because she thought they have authentic cappuccino, that explains her behavior in terms of her belief, a mental state that led her to behave the way she did. But one of the interesting things that Malley discovered is that sometimes people leave mental states linguistically unmarked. That is, you'll find explanations that lack phrases like she wanted or she thought. And one of the things that happens, if you just have this mindset that causes are either external or internal, they're either personal or situational, then what you might do is mistake an unmarked mental state for a situational attribution. So consider the following. She didn't speak up because the teacher was there. If you just read that sentence, you say, well, that's a situational attribution. They're explaining why she didn't speak up because of the presence of the teacher. That's a feature of the external environment. But when you look at it, look at what people really mean by this. What they really mean is she didn't speak up because the teacher was there and she didn't want the teacher to overhear. Okay, that's what people mean when they say things like this. Okay, so when you analyze this properly, what you've actually got is an unmarked mental state. There's an implicit reference to the beliefs and desires of the actor. So, for example, even up here, she went to the cafe because she wanted an authentic cappuccino. Well, that's her desire. She wanted an authentic cappuccino, but she went to the cafe. She has to have gone to that particular cafe also because she thought that cafe served authentic cappuccino. There's a belief that is implied here along with the desire. Similarly here, she went to the cafe because she thought they had authentic cappuccino. She wouldn't care whether they had authentic cappuccino or not unless she wanted an authentic cappuccino. Here, you've got the desire, the belief marked, but the desire unmarked. In a sentence like this, she didn't speak up because the teacher was there. You know? There you've got both the belief and the desire unmarked. So you've got to make that kind of distinction fundamentally. Okay. When you look at unintended behaviors, and you look at the kinds of causes that people attribute for these unintended behaviors, you get kinds of causes that, without too much scrubbing and manipulating, could be applied to any particular causal event. So, for example, we've got these dimensions of causality that crop up in the causal attribution literature a lot, the dimension between internal and external. We explain events in the physical world with internal by referring to internal or external causes. So, for example, if I said the tree fell because its roots were shallow, that's a property of the tree. That's a cause that is internal to the tree that explains why it fell. If I say the tree fell because the wind was strong, that is something that is external to the tree that causes it to fall. We also have distinctions between stable and unstable causes. The tree fell because the winds are strong here, okay, here in this location, close to the shore or whatever, as opposed to inland. That's a stable cause because the winds are strong here. They're always strong here. Or the tree fell because of a tornado. Well, tornadoes are events that are circumscribed in space and time, and they produce strong winds, okay? Global versus local. The tree fell because the soil is bad here. That's a global cause. The tree was planted in soil that just wasn't right for growing a tree. Or the tree fell because it was planted locally. It was planted poorly. Doesn't matter what the soil was like. This particular tree was planted poorly. These kinds of causes apply to any physical event, but they can also apply to any psychological event as well. But any behavioral event, but only unintended behavioral events. We use these kinds of dimensions of causality to explain why unintended behaviors occur. Okay, so in addition to this distinction between reasons, which invoke beliefs and desires, and causes, which invoke essentially mechanistic processes, we have a set of enabling factors. So you might think that skill has something to do with why the event happened. She got an A because she's very smart. Okay, being very smart is something that helps you to get an A. Or opportunity. She got an A because her date was canceled. Her date was canceled, so she had an extra evening to study, and that's why she got the A. Or another third category of enabling factors, obstacle removal. She got an A because she found her notes. She hadn't been able to find her notes. She wouldn't have been able to study. Finding her notes enabled her to get the A. Again, these are the kinds of things you find in people's actual explanations of behavior. The distinction between reasons and causes, these kinds of enabling factors. You also have a feature in people's causal explanations known as the causal history of reasons. She went to the cafe because she wanted an authentic cappuccino. Okay, that invokes belief and desire to explain the behavior of going to the cafe. The next question is, why does she have that belief? Why does she have that desire? So we have a set of factors in causality that explain why people have the beliefs and desires that they do. Here, whereas there is an assumption of a rational connection between the belief and desire and the action, there's no assumption of a rational connection between having to do with the history of these reasons. Why you want an authentic cappuccino, that may not be rational at all. So, for example, there are these causal antecedents of the reasons that people have for their behaviors. For example, there might be something like, if you were a particular kind of psychologist, you might call it unconscious process, right? So you explain, he planted the garden because he loved his mother. Okay, well, maybe his mother was a gardener and he was planting the garden in his honor. That's why he loved his mother. That's the reason why he wanted to plant the garden. Or you might explain, there might be a causal antecedent residing in the person's personality. He planted the garden because he's cheap. Okay, he planted the garden because he's cheap. He wanted to grow his own vegetables. He didn't want to pay Safeways or Trader Joe's the prices. Or his reasons might have their roots in socialization and culture. He planted the garden because he's a farm kid. He likes to be close to the soil, has a pet sheep, whatever it is. But again, there's no assumption of rationality here, but it's an explanation of why he wanted to plant a garden. And then finally, there might be something in the immediate context. He planted the garden because he likes fresh fruit. He lives too far away from a really good supermarket, so he planted the garden so he would have access to these things. These are causal antecedents of the reasons why people engaged in various kinds of behaviors. Okay, he likes fresh fruit. He wants fresh fruit. He believes fresh fruit is good for you, so then he planted the garden. Okay, reasons versus causes. Okay, enabling factors, the causal history of reasons. These are the kinds of factors that show up when you look at the explanations that people actually give for why people do what they do. So here's a model now for Malley's model actually for explaining intentional activity. You've got this intentional act over here, which is the outcome. You've got people's reasons, okay, their beliefs and their desires. Those beliefs and desires create an intention, okay, which leads eventually to the intentional act, but there are other factors to take into account. Why do people have the reasons that they have? Why do they have the beliefs and desires? Well, that's explained by this causal history of reasons. Just wanting to plant a garden or wanting to get an A doesn't get you the A or doesn't get you the garden. These enabling factors also have to be in place, and they intervene on the same way that the causal history of reasons gives rise to reason, the beliefs and desires. These enabling factors allow you to get from your intention to the intentional act. When you look at at unintended action, you get a very different model. We're no longer talking about reasons. Reasons only play a role in intentional action. So we don't have to talk about the causal history of reasons either. What we've got are mere causes. She was nervous because she wanted to do well, okay? And then there are these enabling factors that allow you to get from the mere cause to unintended behaviors. A very different way of explaining various kinds of behaviors. The covariation calculus, the literature on errors and biases, doesn't make this distinction between intentional actions on the one hand and unintended behaviors on the other hand, and that's a fundamental mistake of that whole approach to causal attribution. Yeah?
What's the difference between a mere cause and an enabling factor from unintended? Because like being planted poorly was an example of mere cause, but it might also be an enabling factor if there's a strong wind.
You might think that, okay? It could get even more complicated, but let's take the social example for a moment. She was nervous because she wanted to do well, okay? Well, maybe we could interpose something like taking a Paxil or some kind of anti-anxiety agent or something like that, which would get in the way between the mere cause and the unintended behavior. So yes, if you dug deeply enough, maybe the tree would have withstood the high wind. If the tornado had come a lot later in the tree's life cycle, where its roots were deeper, it might. So there are these enabling factors that intervene between the mere cause and the unintended behavior as well. But they're different kinds of enabling factors. They're enabling factors that don't have anything to do with beliefs and desires. Yeah. Yes, Malley does essentially make the assumption that all of this goes on more or less consciously. Now, there are exceptions to this. It's here, he planted the garden because he loved his mother. It's not clear that he understands that that's in the background, right? But when he goes to his local friendly psychoanalyst, and the analyst says, well, you planted the garden because you loved your mother. He's, oh yeah, I can understand that now, right? You can see that connection between the one thing and the other. But basically, Malley is making the assumption that the reasons that people give for their behavior are the actual reasons. They're the actual antecedents, and there's not some kind of unconscious thing going on. Now, I'm going to take that problem up on Wednesday, okay? Because there's a whole tradition in social cognition that tries to deny that very proposition. Do I have anything else here? Okay, so you got this whole flow chart, which I'll just leave you to deal with. So when you go to explain something now, this is not the covariation calculus anymore. This is something very different. The first thing you do is to determine whether the event is intentional or not. If it's unintentional, you start looking for causes that might reside in the person or the situation. But if it's intentional behavior, you don't look for causes that might reside in the person or the situation. Instead, you look at reasons and the enabling factors and the causal histories that lie behind those reasons. A very different model for explaining behavior than the covariation calculus. Okay, that's it. We'll see you on Wednesday, and we'll take up the problem of automatic and unconscious social cognition.